The young and the restless spoilers for years, Carter was considered one of the most loyal and competent assistants in the business world of Genoa City. He was the right hand of Cain, a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness. Wherever Cain moved, Carter followed, taking notes, handling negotiations, cleaning up messes, shielding his boss from scandal after scandal. To the outside world, theirs was a relationship built on trust, efficiency, and mutual respect. But those who dared look beneath the surface would find a tension long simmering beneath the surface, a history marked by betrayal, buried secrets, and a power dynamic too volatile to last. And then, like a dam finally bursting, the unthinkable happened. In a moment of cold calculation, Carter turned on the very man he had once sworn to protect. The weapon was a knife. The blow, sudden and brutal. The target, Cain, his employer, mentor, and perhaps most damningly, his rival. News of the attack spread like wildfire through the corridors of Chancellor Winters and beyond. Rumors gave way to headlines. Carter, the ever-loyal aide, was arrested and charged with attempted murder. Cain, found bleeding and unconscious in his office, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. But as the city reeled from the shock, the real story was just beginning to unfold. One not simply about an act of violence, but a deeply rooted vendetta, a crumbling empire, and a love that refused to die even when surrounded by blood and betrayal. The question everyone asked was simple: why? What would possess Carter to commit such an act? Had the pressure of working under Cain finally pushed him over the edge? Or was there a darker truth, a buried feud, long masked by professionalism and duty, now erupting in violence? Whispers began to surface that Carter had long harbored resentment toward Cain, who never truly respected or rewarded his loyalty. Perhaps Carter believed he had been used, strung along with empty promises of power and position, only to be discarded like so many others who crossed paths with the ruthless businessmen. But even if these rumors held weight, could they justify what happened? After all, no amount of personal grievance could excuse a knife to the gut. A premeditated act meant not to warn, but to kill. And yet, as Carter sat in a holding cell, silent and unrepentant, another layer to this story was beginning to gain traction. Lily. Her presence at the hospital was immediate and unwavering. She didn't just visit Cain. She stayed. She sat by his bedside, whispered words of comfort, held his hand through the nights, and wept openly in front of staff, friends, and family. The sight of Lily Winters, composed, elegant, and private, in tears for Cain, sent shockwaves through everyone who knew them. Their relationship had been complicated at best, broken at worst. They were lovers once, then enemies, then co-parents struggling to remain civil. So why now, in this moment of chaos and bloodshed, did Lily seem to collapse back into Cain's orbit with such emotional intensity? Speculation grew. Was it love, reignited by trauma? Was it guilt? Or was Lily hiding something? Something more than just a rekindled flame, something rooted in the secrets of their shared past? Her behavior was more than grief. It was protective, desperate, almost possessive. She refused to leave his side. She lashed out at anyone who questioned Cain's past actions, painting him as a man betrayed rather than a man who may have engineered his own downfall. When the press tried to interview her, she walked away. When board members asked about the future of the company, she dismissed them. To Lily, only Cain mattered now, and the world could wait. But just when things seemed they couldn't get more complicated, a name began circulating, one that had long been absent from the public eye. The son of Cain and Lily, a boy now growing into a man, had been called home. The timing couldn't be ignored. Whether summoned out of concern or necessity, his return was bound to complicate everything. Because in him lay the culmination of all their choices, their betrayals, and their fragile attempts at redemption. His arrival would not only reframe the events of the stabbing, but possibly reveal truths long hidden, truths that neither Cain nor Lily may be prepared to confront. Behind closed doors, Lily began making arrangements. She didn't trust the hospital security. She didn't trust the media. She barely trusted her own family. But she trusted her son. Or at least the idea of what he could help her achieve. Some speculated that Cain, even in his weakened state, was still orchestrating events from his hospital bed. That he had expected Carter's betrayal, or at least suspected it, and that calling his son back was part of a larger, more intricate plan. A plan that involved not just surviving, but reclaiming everything he had lost. The company. The family. Lily. His power. But others believed differently. They saw in Cain not a man plotting revenge, but a man broken, caught in a spiral of his own making. And in Lily, they saw desperation, the frantic grasp of a woman who had spent years trying to outrun her past, only to be pulled back in by love, guilt, and unfinished business. Her tears weren't just for Cain's pain. They were for her own, the choices she had made, the man she had walked away from, the life that might have been. And now, with her son on his way and the world watching, she was faced with a decision that would redefine everything. Would she protect Cain at all costs, shielding him from the legal and moral consequences of his legacy? Or would she finally admit the truth, that the man she loved had always been more danger than savior? Meanwhile, Carter's silence remained deafening. He refused to speak to the media, to authorities, even to his own legal counsel beyond what was necessary. But in that silence, the public began to project their own narratives. Some saw him as a traitor, a man who turned on his benefactor in a fit of jealousy and rage. Others painted him as a whistleblower of sorts, someone who had grown tired of enabling a corrupt empire and finally snapped. Still, none of these explanations accounted for the raw violence of the act. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was an assassination attempt. Cold. Calculated. Intended to send a message. And the question remained, to whom? Was the knife meant only for Cain, or was it a warning to those still standing beside him? Was Carter acting alone, or was he part of something larger, a plot to dismantle Cain's empire from within? And if so, how far did the rot go? Who else had turned? Who else had secrets to hide? The arrival of Cain and Lily's son would no doubt stir these waters even further. For those within the company, he was a wild card. Someone with emotional stakes and potential legal authority. For Lily, he was an anchor, a reminder of what she and Cain once created, and perhaps what they could still rebuild. For Cain, he was legacy, redemption, or maybe just another pawn in the ever-shifting game of power and survival. As the days passed, the hospital room where Cain lay unconscious became the epicenter of a storm brewing in silence. Lily's presence remained constant, a guardian and a mystery. Carter's arrest marked only the beginning of a legal battle that promised to be as sensational as it was unpredictable. And the unseen arrival of a young man, born from love, raised in the shadow of ambition, now returning to a world on fire, threatened to unravel everything or set the stage for a new, more dangerous beginning. What came next would depend not on the courts or the doctors, but on the choices made behind closed doors. On the secrets whispered in hospital corridors. On the past no longer buried. And on a family once shattered, now reassembled not in peace, but in conflict, ambition, and the unforgiving weight of legacy. In Genoa City, the line between justice and vengeance had never been thinner. And for Cain, Lily, and the son who now walked among them, the real battle was only beginning. The arrival of Cain and Lily's son in Nice was meant to be a hopeful moment, a rare beam of light piercing through the storm that had engulfed their family. But instead of celebration, the announcement sent a wave of unease rippling through the hospital room where Cain lay recovering, his body ravaged not only by Carter's knife but by the deeper wounds of reflection and fear. The boy was no longer a child, no longer someone to protect from the chaos of adult decisions. He was a man now, observant, intuitive, emotionally intelligent. And he was coming not just to see his father, but to understand what had brought his family to the brink of collapse. Cain had always believed he could control the narrative, spin the truth to fit his needs, compartmentalize his past from his present. But the moment he learned his son was en route to Nice, something shifted inside him. It wasn't joy. It was dread. Because with his son's presence came the risk of scrutiny, and with scrutiny came the risk of exposure. Not just of Carter's betrayal, but of Cain's own sins, long buried beneath charm, deals, and carefully curated lies. Carter's attack had shocked him, but it was the words Carter uttered in the moments before his arrest that haunted Cain more than the blade ever could. Words heavy with bitterness, pain, and clarity. Words that didn't sound like the outburst of a man gone mad, but rather the final act of someone who had been pushed too far for too long. Carter didn't just attack out of rage. He attacked out of truth. Truth Cain didn't want to hear, much less admit. That he had used people, discarded them, manipulated trust, weaponized loyalty. That beneath the empire he built stood a foundation of broken people who once believed in him. Carter had been one of them. A man who gave everything, his time, his silence, his loyalty, and in return, received nothing but pressure, threats, and humiliation. He had stayed because he needed the job, because he believed maybe, one day, Cain would recognize his worth. But that day never came. And in Carter's mind, justice had to be taken, not waited for. As these truths bled into Cain's consciousness, they clashed violently with the version of himself he had always held on to. The visionary. The risk-taker. The misunderstood genius doing whatever it took to win. But lying in that sterile hospital bed, his body wrapped in bandages, the illusion cracked. He began to remember the sharp words he once used to cut Carter down in front of others, the promises made and broken, the nights when he chose ambition over human decency. He had believed it was just business. But now, in the aftermath, it looked less like business and more like betrayal. And if Carter had turned on him because of those choices, who else would? Was Carter merely the first in a line of consequences Cain had ignored for too long? Lily's unwavering presence during his recovery only added to the complexity. Her emotional proximity, her gestures of care, her insistence on shielding him from press and pressure, they all felt real, but also unsettling. Did she truly still love him? Or was she protecting something else? Their son, perhaps? A family name? Or maybe, like him, she feared what their son would discover. Because despite all her strength and conviction, Lily had made choices too, some public, others buried beneath the veneer of control. And as their son prepared to arrive in a city now tainted by scandal and violence, there was a shared anxiety neither could articulate, the fear that he would become the mirror they had long avoided. That his questions would demand honest answers. That he would see them for who they truly were, not who they pretended to be. When Cain first heard the news that his son had booked a flight and would arrive within 24 hours, his heart didn't swell with fatherly pride. Instead, it clenched with a kind of panic he couldn't name. Because no one knew him like his son did. And no one was more capable of pulling apart the carefully woven story of what had happened than a child once raised to believe in his father's greatness. Cain wondered what version of him his son still held on to. Was it the charismatic businessman? The flawed but loving father? Or had time and distance sharpened the boy's ability to see through the cracks? Would he come to support Cain? Or would he come to uncover the truth, and possibly walk away forever? Hospital staff noticed the shift in Cain's mood. He grew more withdrawn, more impatient. Physical pain aside, his mind seemed trapped in a loop of questions he couldn't answer. Every time Lily mentioned their son's name, Cain flinched internally. He wasn't ready for redemption. He wasn't sure he deserved it. And worst of all, he wasn't sure his son would offer it. But he couldn't stop the clock. The young man would arrive soon, and with him, a confrontation Cain had long postponed. Meanwhile, rumors outside the hospital walls began to take on lives of their own. Journalists speculated that the arrival of Cain's son might be part of a larger scheme. A calculated public relations move to garner sympathy and frame the attack as a tragic mistake in an otherwise inspiring family story. Others suggested that the son was being brought in to take over business responsibilities while Cain recovered, a symbolic passing of the torch. But those closest to the situation knew better. This wasn't about business. It wasn't about optics. It was about reckoning. Carter's attack had cracked something open. And now, the truth, whatever shape it took, was beginning to seep through. Carter, from his jail cell, remained calm. He had said what he needed to say. He had nothing more to offer, not to the police, not to the media, not to Cain. Because in his mind, he had already done what was necessary. He had exposed the monster behind the mask. Whether Cain lived or died was no longer his concern. His only regret, perhaps, was that it had taken him so long to act. And so, as night fell over Nice, the city held its breath. Inside the hospital, Cain stared at the ceiling, not seeing the white tiles but instead the faces of every person he had hurt, used, or disappointed. He thought of Lily, curled asleep in the corner chair, her expression more haunted than peaceful. He thought of Carter's final words. And he thought of the plane descending through the clouds, bringing with it a piece of his past he had both longed for and feared. There would be no more lies. No more half-truths. When the door opened and his son stepped into that hospital room, Cain would either begin the long, painful process of atonement, or lose the last person left who still believed in him. And perhaps, in that moment, he would finally understand the full price of power, betrayal, and the hollow victories he once called success. Because some knives cut deeper than flesh. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. And for Cain, the echoes had only just begun. Hoi ChatGPT.